Maple Hollow Promise begins when Natalie, a proud Kentucky farmer on the brink of losing everything, hires a quiet drifter named Daniel. But his wrench isn't the only thing that fixes her world. He's hiding $1 billion secret. Will the truth destroy their fragile new bond? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun beat down on Natalie Rhodes as she struggled with the old tractor that had broken down for the third time that month. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she threw the wrench to the ground in frustration. "Damn it!" she shouted, kicking the tire. "Not again!" At 36, Natalie was used to handling problems on her own. Ever since her ex-fiancé Tom walked out on her 2 years ago, leaving her with a mountain of debt and Maple Hollow Farm to run by herself, she'd been fighting to keep her head above water. The farm, nestled in the rolling hills of Kentucky, was all she had left of her father's legacy. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand and looked out at the fields that needed planting. Without the tractor, she was in serious trouble. The bank was already breathing down her neck about the mortgage payments she'd missed. "Some legacy, Dad," she muttered, thinking of her father who had passed away 3 years ago. They'd been close but stubborn, both of them. He never wanted to modernize the farm, and she never wanted to admit when she needed help. The sound of tires on gravel made her turn toward the driveway. A beat-up pickup truck she didn't recognize was coming up the long drive to the farmhouse. Natalie frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. The truck stopped and a tall man stepped out. He wore worn jeans, work boots, and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had a strong jawline covered with stubble, and his eyes were hidden behind sunglasses. "Can I help you?" Natalie called out, her hand instinctively going to her hip, where she usually kept a small pocket knife. The man smiled easily as he approached. "I hope so. Name's Daniel Cross. Heard in town you might be looking for help around here." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Who told you that?" "Fella at the diner. Said the Rhodes place might need an extra pair of hands." He took off his sunglasses, revealing kind brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I'm just passing through looking for work. I know my way around a farm." What Daniel didn't say was that his real name was Daniel Whitaker, heir to one of the largest agricultural companies in the country. He'd walked away from endless meetings, expectations, and the media spotlight. For the past month, he'd been traveling with nothing but his truck and a desire to find something real. Natalie looked him up and down. "I can't afford to hire anyone right now." Daniel glanced at the tractor. "Looks like you could use some help." "With that, I've got it under control," she said defensively. He raised his hands. "No offense intended. What's the problem with it?" Natalie sighed. "Engine won't turn over. I've checked the battery and the fuel line." "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Knock yourself out." Daniel rolled up his sleeves, revealing tanned, muscular forearms with old scars and calluses that spoke of years of hard work. He leaned over the engine, his movements confident and practiced. Natalie crossed her arms, watching him skeptically. After a few minutes, he emerged with a small part in his hand. "Your starter solenoid's shot," he said. "Easy fix if you've got a replacement." Natalie frowned. "I checked that. It's tricky with this model," he said with no hint of condescension. "Got a parts shed?" Reluctantly, she led him to the storage shed where her father had kept equipment and spare parts for decades. Daniel found what he needed in minutes, as if he'd been working with these machines his whole life. An hour later, the tractor roared. To life, Natalie couldn't hide her surprise or relief. "Lucky guess," she said, though her tone had softened. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. "Look, I need work and you need help. I'm not asking for much, room, board, and a small wage. I'm a hard worker, and I know farming." Natalie chewed her lip. She was drowning in work, and the spring planting couldn't wait. "1 week trial," she said finally. "Then we'll see." Daniel nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Fair enough." "There's a small apartment above the barn," she said, pointing. "Nothing fancy, but it's clean. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. Miss them, you're on your own." "Yes, ma'am," he said with a hint of amusement in his voice. "And don't call me ma'am, it's Natalie." "Natalie," he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her pause. That evening, after showing Daniel, Around the property, Natalie sat at her kitchen table going through bills. The numbers didn't add up, no matter how she arranged them. She needed a miracle to save this place, and a temporary farmhand wasn't going to fix her problems. A knock at the screen door startled her. Daniel stood there with a toolbox. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I noticed your irrigation system is leaking by the east field. Thought I might fix it before morning." Natalie stared at him. "Now it's almost 9. He shrugged. "I don't mind. The moon's bright enough to work by." She followed him out to the field, flashlight in hand. Sure enough, he found the problem. A cracked section of pipe that had been slowly leaking water and money for who knew how long. "My father was good with horses, not pipes," Natalie said, watching as Daniel worked quickly to replace the section. "And you?" Daniel asked. "I'm good with numbers, actually. Got a business degree. I was going to modernize this place, make it profitable again." She laughed without humor. That was the plan anyway. Daniel glanced up at her. "It's still a good plan." "Yeah, well, plans change. My ex-fiancé Tom had big ideas too. Then the first bad season hit and he decided farming wasn't romantic anymore." She stopped, wondering why she was telling this stranger her problems. "His loss," Daniel said simply, tightening the last fitting. Back at the house, Natalie offered him coffee. They sat on the porch, the night sounds of the farm surrounding them. "So, just passing through?" she asked. "Where from?" Daniel hesitated. "All over, really. Needed a change of scenery." "Running from something or towards something?" Natalie asked, then shook her head. "Sorry, none of my business." "Little of both, maybe," he answered with a half smile. "What about you? Always been here?" "Except for college. Came back when Dad got sick. Thought it would be temporary." She looked out at the darkened fields. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. The week flew by. Daniel worked from sunrise to sunset, fixing things Natalie hadn't even known were broken. He repaired fences, tuned up equipment, and helped exercise the 3 horses Natalie kept. The last of what had once been a profitable breeding program her father had run. Most surprising was how he handled the animals. The most temperamental of her horses, a stallion named Thunder, took to Daniel immediately. "You've got away with him," Natalie said, watching Daniel brush the horse down. "Animals know when you respect them," he replied. "My grandfather taught me that." "Was he a farmer?" she asked. Daniel's eyes clouded briefly. "He had land, yes." By the end of the week, Natalie couldn't imagine the farm without him. As they ate dinner on Friday night, a simple meal of chicken and vegetables Natalie had prepared, she cleared her throat. "So, the week's up," she said. Daniel put down his fork, his expression unreadable. "Yes, it is. The work you've done, it would have taken me months. Happy to help." Natalie took a deep breath. "I'd like you to stay. Same arrangement if that works for you." The smile that broke across his face made something flutter in her chest. "Works for me," he said. As the days turned into weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. They would work separately in the mornings, Natalie handling the paperwork and planning, Daniel taking care of the physical labor. After lunch, they would often work together on whatever needed the most attention. Natalie found herself laughing more than she had in years. Daniel had a quiet sense of humor and a way of making even the hardest work seem manageable. She caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his shirt stuck to his back in the heat, the gentle way he handled the animals, the thoughtful expression he wore when he thought no one was watching. One afternoon, a sudden spring storm caught them in the fields. They ran for the barn, soaked to the skin and laughing. "That came out of nowhere," Natalie said, wringing water from her hair. Daniel grabbed a couple of old towels from a shelf. "Here," he said, handing her one. Their fingers brushed, and Natalie felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. For a moment they stood close, the only sound the rain hammering on the roof and their breathing. Daniel reached out slowly and tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. Natalie's heart pounded in her chest. The moment was broken by the ringing of a phone. Daniel stepped back, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. He glanced at the screen, frowned and declined the call. "Everything okay?" Natalie asked. "Fine," he said, but his jaw was tight. Just someone I don't want to talk to right now. The phone rang again almost immediately. Must be important, Natalie said. Daniel sighed and walked a few steps away. I need to take this, he said apologetically. Natalie nodded and busied herself with checking on the horses, but she couldn't help overhearing snippets of his conversation. I told you not to call this number. No, I'm not coming back. I don't care about the board meeting. It's my life, Richard. He ended the call abruptly. Anne turned to find Natalie pretending she hadn't heard. Sorry about that, he said, his voice strained. No problem, sounds like someone's looking for you. Daniel's eyes met hers. It's complicated. Isn't it always? She replied with a small smile. That evening, Natalie sat on her porch swing watching. The sun set after the storm. Daniel approached from the barn, 2 mugs in his hands. Coffee? He offered, handing her one. Thanks, she said, making room for him on the swing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently. I was engaged once, Daniel said suddenly. It didn't work out. Natalie looked at him, surprised by the personal revelation. What happened? She loved the idea of me more than the real me, he said after a pause. What about your ex? Natalie sighed. Tom wanted the good parts of farm life, the sunsets, the open space. He didn't want the hard work, the uncertainty. His loss, Daniel said again, echoing his words from their first night. Their eyes met, and this time there was no phone call to interrupt the moment. Daniel leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, Natalie closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a gentle kiss. When they broke apart, Natalie's heart was racing. It had been so long since she'd felt anything like this. I should get some rest, she said, suddenly afraid of how much she wanted him to stay. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Good night, Natalie. As she lay in bed that night, Natalie couldn't stop thinking about the kiss, about Daniel. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful about the future. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered caution. Why would someone like Daniel, capable, kind, and undeniably handsome, choose to work as a hired hand on a struggling farm? What was he running from? What Natalie didn't know was that at that very moment, Daniel was sitting in his small apartment above the barn, staring at his phone. On the screen was a news alert about Daniel Whitaker, heir to Whitaker Agricultural Industries, who had mysteriously disappeared from public life weeks ago. The longer he stayed at Maple Hollow Farm, the greater the risk that his real identity would be discovered. But as he thought of Natalie, her strength, her determination, her kiss, he knew he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until he figured out a way to tell her the truth without losing her, the truth that could destroy everything growing between them. The weeks that followed their first kiss brought a new energy to Maple Hollow Farm. Spring was in full bloom, and for the first time in years, Natalie dared to hope that things might turn around. With Daniel's help, they had planted more acres than she'd been able to manage alone, fixed most of the critical equipment, and even started making plans to revive her father's horse breeding program. You seem happier, said Maggie, Natalie's best friend since high school, as they sat drinking iced tea on the porch one Sunday afternoon. Daniel had driven into town for supplies, giving the women time to catch up. Things are looking up, Natalie admitted, trying to hide her smile. Maggie raised an eyebrow. And I'm guessing it has nothing to do with that good-looking farmhand you hired? Natalie felt her cheeks flush. Daniel's been a huge help around here. Uh-huh, Maggie said with a knowing grin. Just a huge help, is he? The way you look at him tells a different story. Is it that obvious? Natalie groaned. Only to anyone with eyes, Maggie teased. So what's his story anyway? Guys who look like that don't usually show up out of nowhere to work on struggling farms. The question made Natalie uncomfortable. Despite growing closer to Daniel over the past month, there was still so much about him she didn't know. He's just passing through, Natalie said. Needed a job? I needed help. And that's all? Maggie pressed. That's all I know, Natalie admitted. He doesn't talk much about his past. Maggie frowned. Don't you think that's a little strange? Everyone has things they don't want to talk about, Natalie defended him. I'm just saying be careful, Maggie said gently. You've been hurt before. I don't want to see it happen again. After Maggie left, Natalie couldn't shake her friend's concerns. Daniel was becoming important to her, maybe too important, and she knew almost nothing about his life before he arrived at her farm. That evening, when Daniel returned from town, they sat together on the porch as had become their habit. The air between them felt different after Maggie's visit. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, noticing her quietness. Natalie took a deep breath. "Where are you from, Daniel? Really?" He stiffened slightly. "I told you I've moved around a lot." "That's not an answer," she said softly. "We've been getting closer. I just want to know who you are." Daniel looked out at the fields, his expression troubled. "I grew up in Virginia, on a farm like this one." It wasn't entirely a lie. The Whitaker family estate had started as farmland generations ago, before growing into a corporate empire. "And your family?" "My father and I don't see eye to eye," he said carefully. "He had certain expectations for my life that I couldn't live with." Natalie nodded slowly. She understood family expectations all too well. "Is that who calls you, your father?" "Sometimes him, sometimes people who work for him," Daniel admitted. Natalie reached for his hand. "Whatever you're running from, Daniel, you can tell me." He squeezed her hand, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Not yet," he said. "Please trust me a little longer." Against her better judgment, Natalie nodded. When he kissed her, soft and sweet at first, then with growing passion, she let herself fall into the moment, pushing her doubts aside. Later that night, tangled in her sheets, Natalie watched Daniel sleep beside her. In the moonlight streaming through her bedroom window, she traced the lines of his face with her eyes, wondering about the secrets he kept. Whatever they were, she was falling in love with him, and that terrified her. Meanwhile, in the corporate offices of Whitaker Agricultural Industries in Richmond, Virginia, Richard Keene, the company's chief operating officer, was growing increasingly frustrated. As Daniel Whitaker's right-hand man for 5 years, he was one of the few people who knew where the air had gone. "It's been over a month, sir," Richard said to James Whitaker, Daniel's father and CEO of the company. "The board is getting restless. We need to make an announcement about Daniel's sabbatical." James Whitaker, a stern man in his 60s with silver hair and cold blue eyes, so unlike his son's warm brown ones, frowned deeply. "Have you spoken to him?" James demanded. "I've tried. He refuses to come back," Richard said. "But I've traced his location to a small farm in Kentucky, Maple Hollow Farm, owned by a woman named Natalie Rhodes." James's expression darkened. "Find out everything you can about this woman and her farm. My son may be going through some kind of midlife crisis, but he has responsibilities he cannot simply walk away from." "Yes, sir," Richard nodded. "And Richard," James added, "not a word of this to the press. The last thing we need is a media circus." Back at Maple Hollow, the days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Natalie and Daniel worked side by side during the day and spent their evenings together, talking, laughing, and growing closer. For Daniel, it was a kind of peace he'd never known. One particularly hot afternoon, they decided to take the horses out for a ride to check the fences on the far side of the property. They rode at an easy pace, Daniel on Thunder and Natalie on her mare Starlight. "My father taught me to ride before I could walk," Natalie said, watching Daniel handle the stallion with ease. "But he would never let me race him. Said it wasn't ladylike." Daniel grinned. "So naturally you raced everyone else when he wasn't looking," Natalie laughed. "How did you know?" "Because I know you," he said, his eyes soft with affection. "Race you to the big oak?" he challenged suddenly. They took off, horses galloping across the open field, Natalie's laughter trailing behind them like music. She won by a nose, her face flushed with exertion and joy as they slowed to a stop. "You let me win," she accused playfully. "Never," he promised, reaching over to push a strand of hair from her face. "I wouldn't dare." They dismounted by a small creek to let the horses drink. Sitting on the grassy bank, Daniel pulled Natalie close, her back against his chest, his arms around her waist. "I could stay like this forever," he murmured into her. Hair Natalie felt a pang in her chest. "But you won't, will you?" Daniel tensed. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him. "You said you were just passing through when you came here. Is that still true?" The question hung between them. Daniel cupped her face in his hands. "I didn't expect you," he said honestly. "I didn't expect any of this. But now that I've found you, I don't want to leave." "Then don't," she whispered. He kissed her deeply as if trying to pour all his unspoken feelings into that one gesture. When they finally broke apart, his expression was troubled. "There are things I need to tell you, Natalie. Things about who I am." Her heart raced with a mixture of hope and fear. "Tell me now." He opened his mouth to speak, but the ringing of his phone cut him off. Daniel swore under his breath, checking the screen. "I have to take this," he said apologetically. "It's important." Natalie nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She walked to the edge of the creek, giving him privacy, but she couldn't help overhearing his side of the conversation. "Dunno, Richard. They can't do that without my signature. I don't care what my father said." "No, absolutely not." His voice grew more agitated. "The Rhodes farm? How do you know about—" He stopped, his face darkening. "Stay away from here." "Richard, I mean it." When he hung up, his hands were shaking slightly. "Daniel," Natalie approached cautiously. "What's going on?" He ran a hand through his hair. "We need to head back," he said, his voice tight. "I'll explain everything tonight, I promise." The ride back to the farm was tense and quiet. As they approached the main house, Natalie spotted an unfamiliar car parked in the driveway. A sleek black luxury sedan that looked wildly out of place against the weathered farm buildings. A man in an expensive suit stood on her porch, checking his watch impatiently. When he spotted them, he straightened and stepped forward. "Mr. Whitaker," he called out, "your father sent me to bring you home." Natalie froze, looking between the stranger and Daniel. "Mr. Whitaker?" she repeated, confusion clear on her face. Daniel's expression was a mix of anger and resignation. "Damn it, Richard," he muttered, dismounting from Thunder. "What's going on?" Natalie demanded, sliding off her horse. "Who is this man, and why is he calling you Whitaker?" Richard stepped forward, extending his hand to Natalie. "Richard Keene, Chief Operating Officer of Whitaker Agricultural Industries. I apologize for the intrusion, Ms. Rhodes, but I need to speak with Daniel on an urgent company matter." Natalie ignored his hand, turning to Daniel instead. "Whitaker Agricultural Industries? The company that's been buying up all the small farms in the state?" Her voice rose in disbelief. "Who are you?" Daniel stepped toward her. "Natalie, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" she demanded. "That you've been lying to me this whole time? That you're not Daniel Cross, just some farmhand passing through?" "I am Daniel," he insisted. "Daniel Whitaker. But everything else, how I feel about the farm, about you, that's all real." Richard cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should wait in the car," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the personal drama unfolding. "Yes, you should," Daniel snapped, not taking his eyes off Natalie. As Richard retreated, Natalie crossed her arms tightly across her chest as if physically holding herself together. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why the lies? Was this some kind of game to you?" "No," Daniel said firmly. "God, no. I left Richmond because I couldn't stand that life anymore. The endless meetings, the media attention, the superficial relationships. I just wanted something real. So you came here and pretended to be someone else?" "I didn't plan any of this," he said. "I was just driving, no destination in mind. When I stopped in town and heard about a farm that needed help, it seemed right. I didn't plan to stay, and I certainly didn't plan to fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Under different circumstances, hearing him say he loved her would have made Natalie's heart soar. Now, it just made the betrayal cut deeper. "You looked me in the eyes every day and let me believe you were someone else," she said, her voice trembling. "You knew how much this farm means to me, how hard I've been fighting to hold on to it. And all this time, you're one of the people whose company has been forcing farmers like me to sell out." "I'm not my father," Daniel said. "I don't agree with how Whitaker Ag does business. That's part of why I left." "But you didn't tell me that, did you?" Natalie shot back. "All those times I talked about my financial troubles, about how close I am to losing this place. Were you laughing at me? Poor Natalie Rhodes, so proud, so stubborn, doesn't even know she's sleeping with the enemy." "It wasn't like that," Daniel said, reaching for her. Natalie stepped back out of his reach. "Don't touch me." The hurt in her eyes was like a physical blow. Daniel dropped his hand. "Natalie, please, give me a chance to make this right." "How?" she demanded. "How do you make right the fact that you've been lying to me from the moment we met? That I shared my bed, my life, my heart with someone who doesn't even exist?" Before Daniel could answer, Richard approached again, looking apologetic but determined. "Daniel, I'm sorry, but we need to leave. Your father has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. If you're not there, he's threatening to use your absence to have you removed from the board entirely." Daniel clenched his jaw. "I don't care about the board." "You should," Richard insisted. "Your father is making moves you won't like. Projects that go against everything you've been fighting for within the company. Without your vote, he'll have free rein." Natalie watched the exchange, seeing a different side of Daniel. The businessman, the heir, someone with power and responsibilities she hadn't known about. "You should go," she said finally, her voice cold. Daniel turned to her, anguish clear on his face. "Natalie, just go," she repeated. "You have a life waiting for you, Daniel Whitaker. A real life. This," she gestured around the farm, "was just a vacation for you, a fantasy." "That's not true," he insisted. "Isn't it?" she challenged. "You always knew you'd go back eventually. I was just something to pass the time with." Daniel shook, his head desperately. "You're wrong. What we have is real." "What we had," she corrected, "was built on lies." Richard cleared his throat again. "Daniel, we really need to go." With one last pleading look at Natalie, Daniel finally nodded. "I'll get my things," he said quietly. 10 minutes later, Natalie stood on her porch watching the black car disappear down the driveway, taking with it the man she had fallen in love with, and the man she now realized she had never really known at all. As the sun set over Maple Hollow Farm, Natalie sat alone on the porch swing where they had shared so many evenings, so many kisses. The farm suddenly felt emptier than it ever had, even after her father died, even after Tom left, because this time she had lost not just a person, but the future she had started to believe in again. And somewhere on the road to Richmond, Daniel Whitaker stared out the window of the luxury car, watching the countryside fly by, already missing the simple life he'd found and the woman who had made him feel truly alive for the first time. "She'll come around," Richard said, mistaking Daniel's silence for simple relationship troubles. "Once she realizes who you are, what are you can offer her." Daniel shook his head. "You don't understand Natalie. She doesn't care about money or status. She cares about honesty, about the land." He turned to his friend with determination in his eyes. "And so do I. Which is why I'm going to that board meeting tomorrow, but not for the reasons my father wants." Richard raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning?" "Something I should have done a long time ago," Daniel said. "Something that might just help me win back the only thing that really matters." As the car continued toward Richmond and the corporate world he'd tried to escape, Daniel made a silent promise to Natalie, to himself, and to the land that had brought them together. He would find a way back to her, a way to make things right. Even if it meant standing up to his father and changing Whitaker Agricultural Industries forever. The Richmond skyline came into view as the sleek black car carried Daniel back to the world he'd left behind. Glass and steel towers replaced the rolling hills and open fields he'd grown to love over the past months. The Whitaker Agricultural Industries headquarters dominated the city center, a 40-story monument to his family's power and wealth. "Your apartment has been maintained in your absence," Richard said as they pulled into the underground parking garage. "And your father expects you for dinner tonight, before tomorrow's board meeting." Daniel nodded absently, his mind still at Maple Hollow Farm with Natalie. The hurt in her eyes when she discovered his lie haunted him. He'd never meant to cause her pain. "I'll need to review all the board documents before tomorrow," Daniel said, slipping back into his business persona with uncomfortable ease, "especially anything related to our Kentucky operations." Richard gave him a sideways glance. "You know, your father won't be happy if you try to change company strategy because of a personal entanglement." "Natalie isn't an entanglement," Daniel said sharply. "And my concerns about how we do business predate meeting her." "Of course," Richard said smoothly. "I've had the files sent to your apartment. Your father expects you at 8. Stepping into his penthouse apartment felt surreal. The minimalist furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their panoramic city views, the careful art collection on the walls. None of it felt like home anymore. After the warm, lived-in comfort of Natalie's farmhouse, this place seemed cold and impersonal. Daniel showered and changed into a suit, feeling like he was putting on a costume. When he looked in the mirror, Daniel Whitaker, corporate heir and board member, stared back at him. There was no trace of the man who had fixed tractors and mended fences at Maple Hollow. The dinner with his father was exactly as Daniel expected, tense and formal, held in the private dining room of an exclusive restaurant where the elder Whitaker was treated like royalty. James Whitaker fixed his son with a cold stare across the white tablecloth. "I hope you've gotten this rebellion out of your system." "It wasn't a rebellion," Daniel said evenly. "I needed time to think, to figure out what I really want." "And what is that exactly?" his father asked. "To play farmer? To throw away generations of hard work and success? To do business ethically," Daniel countered. "To help small farmers survive instead of driving them out." James snorted. "Idealism. The luxury of youth. You didn't always think this way," Daniel reminded him. "Grandfather built this company on partnerships with family farms. Your grandfather lived in a different time," James dismissed. "The market has changed. Consolidation is inevitable, only if we make it so." The waiter brought their steaks, interrupting the tense conversation. They ate in silence for a few minutes before James spoke again. "Tell me about this Rhodes woman," he said casually. Daniel set down his fork. "She's not your concern. When the future CEO of my company disappears for months to work as a laborer on her farm, she becomes my concern." "How did you even find me?" Daniel asked. James waved a hand dismissively. "Does it matter? What matters is that you're back where you belong, ready to take your place in the company. And if that's not what I want," his father's eyes hardened, "then you lose everything. Your seat on the board, your shares, your inheritance. Is that what you want? To give up your birthright for some farmer?" The threat hung in the air between them. Daniel knew his father well enough to know it wasn't a bluff. "The board meeting is at 9 tomorrow, James said, moving on as if the matter was settled. "Don't be late." Back in his apartment, Daniel paced, restlessly. He had spent years trying to please his father, to live up to the Whitaker name. But in those months at Maple Hollow, working with his hands, connecting with the land, and with Natalie, he had found something more meaningful than corporate success. He picked up his phone and stared at Natalie's number. Would she even answer if he called? What could he possibly say to make things right? He was still wrestling with these thoughts when his phone rang. It was Richard. "We have a problem," Richard said without preamble. "Your father moved the Davidson acquisition up on the agenda for tomorrow. It's first thing," Daniel swore under his breath. The Davidson acquisition was a package of small farms in Kentucky that Whitaker Ag had been pressuring to sell. Farms just like Natalie's. "He knows I oppose that deal," Daniel said. "He's trying to push it through while I'm off balance." "There's more," Richard continued. "I've been going through the paperwork. Maple Hollow Farm is on the list." Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "What?" "Your father added it during your absence. Apparently, Ms. Rhodes is behind on her mortgage payments. The bank is willing to sell the debt to Whitaker Ag. He's doing this to punish me," Daniel realized, "to show me he's in control." "Possibly," Richard admitted. "But there's a business case too. That land is valuable, especially with the water rights." Daniel made a decision. "I need you to start making calls tonight." "What kind of calls?" "I'm going to need allies for tomorrow, and I need everything you can find on Maple Hollow's finances." "Daniel," Richard said carefully, "what are you planning?" "Something my father isn't expecting," Daniel replied. "Something he won't see coming until it's too late." Meanwhile, back at Maple Hollow Farm, Natalie was going through her own crisis. After Daniel left, she had thrown herself into work, spending hours in the fields until physical exhaustion temporarily dulled the emotional pain. But now, sitting at her kitchen table with spreadsheets spread out before her, reality was crashing down. The bank had called earlier, making it clear that her extension on the mortgage was their final offer. Without a miracle, she would lose the farm within months. A knock at the door startled her. For one wild moment, her heart leapt with hope that it might be Daniel. Instead, she found Maggie standing on the porch with a bottle of wine. "I figured you could use this," her friend said, taking in Natalie's red-rimmed eyes and disheveled appearance. Natalie managed a weak smile. "How did you... No, small town," Maggie said, following her inside. Bill at the diner saw a fancy black car heading this way. Then later, he saw the same car leaving with your farmhand and a man in a suit. She poured 2 glasses of wine. "Want to talk about it?" The whole story came pouring out. Daniel's real identity, the lies, their relationship, his abrupt departure. "Daniel Whitaker," Maggie repeated when Natalie finished. "As in Whitaker Agricultural Industries, the company that's been buying up half the county?" Natalie nodded miserably. "I knew he was hiding something," Maggie said, "but I never expected this. I was such a fool," Natalie said. "Falling for him, trusting him." Maggie reached for her hand. "You couldn't have known." "I should have asked." "More questions," Natalie insisted. "All those phone calls he kept getting. The way he avoided talking about his past. I ignored the signs because I wanted to believe in him." "Do you think any of it was real?" Maggie asked gently. "His feelings for you?" Natalie stared into her wine glass. "I don't know what to believe anymore. He said he loved me. But how can I trust anything he said?" "For what it's worth," Maggie said carefully, "the way he looked at you, that's hard to fake." A tear slipped down Natalie's cheek. "It doesn't matter now. He's gone back to his real life, his mansions and corporate jets and board meetings." "And what will you do?" Natalie gestured to the financial papers. "Try to save my farm again." "Maybe," Maggie hesitated. "Maybe Daniel could help with that." "No," Natalie said firmly. "I won't take his money or his pity. I'll find a way to do this on my own, just like I always have." But after Maggie left, Natalie stood on the porch looking out at the land that had been in her family for generations. The moonlight bathed the fields in silver, the same fields where she and Daniel had ridden horses, fixed fences, and fallen in love. Despite her anger and hurt, she couldn't deny that her feelings for him had been real. She just didn't know if his had been. The next morning, in Richmond, Daniel entered the Whitaker Ag boardroom precisely at 9 o'clock. The large oval table was already surrounded by board members, mostly men in their 50s and 60s, longtime allies of his father. James Whitaker sat at the head of the table, looking confident and completely in control. "Daniel," he acknowledged, with a nod. "Good of you to join us after your sabbatical." Several board members chuckled, but Daniel ignored the jab, taking his seat near the middle of the table. "Now then," James continued, "our first order of business is the Davidson acquisition package. As you all know, this represents a significant opportunity for expansion in our Kentucky operations." He nodded to his assistant, who began distributing folders. "The financial projections are quite promising," Daniel spoke up. "Before we move forward, I'd like to propose an alternative strategy." His father frowned. "We have an agenda to follow, Daniel." "As a board member, I have the right to bring new business to the table," Daniel said calmly, making eye contact with several of the older members who had known his grandfather, especially when it directly relates to the item at hand. One of them, Walter Simmons, nodded. "Let's hear the boy out, James." Daniel stood and passed out his own folders. "What I'm proposing is a fundamental shift in how we approach these acquisitions. Instead of forcing these family farms to sell out, we create partnerships. We offer capital, technology, and market access while allowing them to retain ownership and control of their land." Several board members looked interested, but James scoffed. "Sentimental nonsense. The margins aren't there." "Actually," Richard said, stepping forward with more documents, "the projections show that over a 5 to 10-year period, this approach would be more profitable and more sustainable. It would also generate significant goodwill in rural communities where our reputation has suffered. Not to mention," Daniel added, "it would eliminate the legal costs and negative publicity from fighting these families in court. Families who often have multi-generational ties to their land." "Like your new girlfriend," James said coldly. Daniel met his father's gaze without flinching. "Yes, like Natalie Rhodes, whose farm you added to this acquisition package solely to punish me," murmurs. So ran around the table. Walter Simmons frowned. Is that true, James? Of course not, James said dismissively. The Rhodes farm is a strategic acquisition, nothing more. Then you won't mind if we remove it from consideration, Daniel challenged. For the next 2 hours, the board meeting became a battle of wills between father and son. Daniel presented his case methodically, drawing on his business education and the practical knowledge he'd gained at Maple Hollow. To his surprise, several of the older board members began to side with him. This reminds me of how Willard Whittaker used to do business, Walter Simmons said, referring to Daniel's grandfather. Building relationships, not just buying assets. James could see the tide turning. This is all very touching, he said sarcastically, but the fact remains that Daniel abandoned his responsibilities to play farmer with some woman. How can we trust his judgment? My time at Maple Hollow gave me insights we've been missing, Daniel countered. We've become too disconnected from the actual work of farming, from the communities we affect. That's why our reputation has suffered. I've had enough of this, James snapped. We'll put it to a vote. My acquisition plan against Daniel's partnership fantasy. The vote was close, but to James's visible shock, Daniel's proposal passed by a narrow margin. This isn't over, James said quietly to Daniel as the meeting adjourned. You may have won today, but don't think for a moment that you've taken control of this company. It was never about control, Daniel replied. It's about doing what's right. As the boardroom emptied, Richard approached Daniel. That was impressive, but what now? Do you really think your Miss Rhodes will forgive you just because you saved her farm? Daniel shook his head. Saving her farm was the right thing to do, regardless of whether she forgives me, but I'm not giving up on her, Richard. I can't. That afternoon, Daniel made one more stop before leaving Richmond. His grandfather's old office, preserved as a kind of museum to the company's founder. As a child, Daniel had spent hours here, listening to his grandfather's stories about building the business one handshake at a time. I think you would have liked her, Grandpa, Daniel said to the empty room. Natalie's a lot like you, stubborn, principled, connected to the land. His eyes fell on a framed document on the wall, his grandfather's original business philosophy, typed out on a manual typewriter decades ago. Land is not merely an asset to be acquired, but a trust to be preserved. Those who work it are not obstacles to be removed, but partners to be valued. Build with them, not over them. Daniel took a picture of it with his phone, then left the office with renewed determination. He had a long drive ahead of him, and no guarantee that Natalie would even speak to him when he arrived. But he had to try. The sun was setting by the time Daniel's truck, not the company car, but his own pickup that he'd retrieved from storage, turned onto the familiar gravel drive of Maple Hollow Farm. His heart pounded as the farmhouse came into view, lights glowing warmly in the windows. He parked and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. In his jacket pocket was the deed to Maple Hollow Farm, now free and clear of all debt. He had signed it over to Natalie completely, with no strings attached. If she turned him away, at least she would have her land, but he desperately hoped she wouldn't turn him away. Daniel stepped out of the truck just as the front door opened. Natalie stood on the porch, silhouetted by the light behind her. She had clearly seen him coming up the drive. "What are you doing here?" she called, her voice guarded. Daniel approached slowly, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "I had to see you," he said, "to try to explain." "There's nothing to explain," Natalie said, crossing her arms. "You lied about who you were for months." "Yes," he admitted, "and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But I never lied about how I felt about you, Natalie. Never." Her expression remained skeptical. "Why should I believe anything you say now?" Daniel took a deep breath. "Because I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking you for anything. I just want you to know the truth. All of it." Something in his voice must have reached her, because after a long moment Natalie nodded. "I'm listening." Daniel explained everything. His disillusionment with his father's business practices, his impulsive decision to leave, how finding Maple Hollow had started as simply a place to hide, but had become so much more. "When I met you," he said, "I was lost, trying to figure out who I was outside of my family name. I should have told you the truth sooner, but I was afraid that once you knew who I really was, everything would change. It did change, Natalie pointed out. Yes, Daniel acknowledged. And that's on me. I betrayed your trust and I can't undo that. But what I felt for you, what I still feel, that was real, Natalie. The most real thing in my life. Natalie's expression softened slightly, but she remained where she was. So what happens now? You go back to your corporate life and I stay here trying to keep this place running. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded deed. Actually, that's part of why I came. He held it out to her. This is for you. Cautiously, Natalie came down the steps and took the paper. As she unfolded it and read, her eyes widened. What is this? She demanded. The deed to Maple Hollow Farm, Daniel explained, free and clear. The bank sold the mortgage to Whitaker Ag, and I had it transferred to you. No strings attached. Natalie stared at him in disbelief. You bought my farm? I saved it, Daniel corrected gently. From my father, who was planning to acquire it as part of a larger package. But it's yours now, completely. Whether you want me in your life or not. I don't understand, Natalie said, shaking her head. Why would you do this? Because I love you, Daniel said simply. Because this land is part of who you are, and because it was the right thing to do. Natalie looked down at the deed, then back at Daniel. I never wanted your money. I know, he said with a sad smile. You wanted my truth. Well, here it is. I'm Daniel Whitaker. I was born into privilege I didn't earn. I've spent the last 48 hours fighting my father and the board to change how our company operates. And I've never loved anyone the way I love you. Tears filled Natalie's eyes, but she blinked them back. And what now? You go back to Richmond? Daniel shook his head. I've taken a new position within the company, head of a new division focused on sustainable partnerships with family farms. I'll need to travel sometimes, but he hesitated. I was hoping I could base myself here if you'll have me. As what? Natalie asked. My boyfriend? My farmhand? As whatever you'll let me be, Daniel answered honestly. Partner? Friend? Or just a neighbor who helps out sometimes? I don't expect you to forgive me right away or maybe ever, but I'm asking for a chance to earn back your trust. The moment stretched between them, filled with all that had been lost and all that might still be possible. You hurt me, Natalie said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, Daniel acknowledged, and I will spend every day trying to make that right if you'll let me. Natalie looked out at her farm truly hers now, then back at the man standing before her. The man who had lied about his name but had shown her his heart in 1,000 true ways over their months together. I need time, she said. Daniel nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. I understand, I'll go. As he turned to leave, Natalie spoke again. I didn't say I needed you to go, I said I needed time. Daniel stopped, hope blooming in his chest. What are you saying? Natalie took a step toward him. I'm saying, maybe you could fix that leaky pipe in the barn while I think about it, the one you were supposed to get to before you left. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. I can do that. And maybe, Natalie continued, taking another step closer, while you're doing that, I can think about how much I missed you, even when I was furious with you. I missed you too, Daniel said softly. Every minute. They stood facing each other in the fading light, the deed to Maple Hollow Farm still clutched in Natalie's hand. I'm still angry, she warned. You have every right to be. And it's going to take a long time before I fully trust you again. Daniel nodded. I know. Natalie took a deep breath. But I still love you. God help me. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. Those words, the words he had feared he might never hear again, nearly brought Daniel to his knees. Slowly, giving her every chance to back away, he closed the distance between them. When his lips finally met hers, it felt like coming home, the fee. Early fall breeze rustled through the trees surrounding Maple Hollow Farm, bringing with it the scent of ripe apples and the promise of cooler days ahead. 3 months had passed since Daniel's return, 3 months of rebuilding trust one day at a time. True to his word, Daniel had started with that leaky pipe in the barn, then moved on to 100 other small repairs and improvements around the farm. Some days they worked side by side in comfortable silence. Other days they talked for hours, filling in the gaps of their stories, learning each other anew. Natalie sat at the kitchen table going through the farm's books, a cup of coffee growing cold beside her. For the first time in years, the columns of numbers didn't fill her with dread. With the mortgage paid off, she had been able to invest in new equipment and expand her planting. The horse breeding program her father had started was also showing promise again, with 2 new foals expected in the spring. She heard the screen door open and close, then Daniel's footsteps crossing the kitchen floor. He came up behind her chair and placed his hands on her shoulders, gently massaging the tension away. "How's it looking?" he asked, nodding toward the account books. "Better than I ever imagined," Natalie admitted. "We might actually turn a profit this year." Daniel smiled. "I never doubted it." She reached up to cover one of his hands with her own. "That makes one of us." He leaned down to kiss the top of her head. "Have a little faith, Ms. Rhodes." In the months since his return, they had settled into a new rhythm. Daniel split his time between the farm and his work with Whitaker Agricultural Industries, using Maple Hollow as a testing ground for the new partnership model he was developing with other family farms in the region. It wasn't always easy, but they were making it work. "Speaking of faith," Daniel said, "Richard called. The board approved the funding for the Family Farm Initiative. We can start rolling it out next month." Natalie turned in her chair to look up at him, her eyes bright with excitement. "That's wonderful. Your father must be furious." Daniel chuckled. "He's coming around, believe it or not. The early results are hard to argue with. The farms in our pilot program are showing increased yields and better sustainability metrics. Even he has to admit it's good business." "I never thought I'd see the day when Whitaker Ag would be helping small farms instead of trying to swallow them up." "People can change," Daniel said softly. "Given the right motivation." The look he gave her made Natalie's heart flutter, even after all these months. She still marveled sometimes at the journey they'd taken, from strangers to lovers to enemies, and now to partners in every sense of the word. "I have a surprise for you," Daniel said, offering his hand to help her up from the chair. "Come with me." He led her outside to his truck. "We need to take a little drive." "Where are we going?" Natalie asked, curious. "You'll see." 20 minutes later, they pulled up to the old Davidson property that bordered Maple Hollow to the east. The farm had been vacant for nearly a year, since the elderly couple who owned it had reluctantly sold to a developer after their children showed no interest in taking it over. "What are we doing here?" Natalie asked, as Daniel helped her down from the truck. "Well," he said, taking her hand, "I thought we might want to take a look at our potential new expansion." Natalie stopped walking. "What do you mean?" Daniel's eyes were bright with excitement. "The development deal fell through. The land is available again. And I thought, well, with Maple Hollow doing so well, it might be time to consider growing." "Our operation." "Our operation," Natalie repeated, her voice soft. They had been careful about keeping their finances separate, even as their lives had become increasingly intertwined. Daniel had insisted that Maple Hollow remain entirely hers, wanting her to know that his love came with no strings attached. "Only if you want," he said quickly. "It was just an idea. The land has good water access, and there's enough pasture to double your horse breeding program." Natalie looked out over the rolling hills, picturing the possibilities. "It's a big step," she said. "Too big?" Daniel asked carefully. She squeezed his hand. "No, just big." They walked the property line together, discussing how the 2 farms could be integrated. The old Davidson house would need work, but the barn was solid and the fields had been well maintained before the owners left. "We could convert the old house into an office for the Family Farm Initiative," Daniel suggested. "Run the whole program from here instead of Richmond." Natalie looked at him. "You'd do that? Move your entire operation here?" "In a heartbeat," Daniel said without hesitation. "Richmond never felt like home the way this place does." He paused, looking out over the land. "The way you do." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside Natalie. Over these past months, she had watched him work tirelessly to prove himself, not with grand gestures, but with consistent actions that showed his commitment to her, to the farm, and to the values they shared. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now where once they had been guarded. And I think expanding is a great idea. Daniel's face lit up with a smile. Yeah? Yeah, she confirmed. But I have one condition. Name it. I want us to be true partners in this, Natalie said. No more separate finances, separate plans. If we're going to build something together, I want it to be really together. Daniel's expression grew serious. Are you sure? I never wanted you to feel like I was trying to take over. I'm sure, Natalie said firmly. It took me a while to trust again, not just you, but myself, to believe that I could let someone in without losing who I am. But I'm there now, Daniel. I want a future with you, all in. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. All in, he echoed. I like the sound of that. They stood together for a long moment, looking out over what could become their expanded farm. The afternoon sun bathed the hills in golden light, much like it had on that first day when Daniel had arrived at Maple Hollow looking for work. Remember, that day I fixed your tractor? Daniel asked, his arms still around her waist. Natalie laughed. How could I forget? I was so suspicious of you. With good reason, as it turned out, he acknowledged ruefully. Maybe, she conceded, but you still saved my tractor and eventually my farm. You were saving it long before I came along, Daniel said. I just helped with a few repairs. And a mortgage, Natalie reminded him. Details, he said with a smile. The point is, even when I was pretending to be someone else, you saw the real me. You taught me what it means to belong somewhere, to something greater than myself. He turned her to face him, his eyes serious. That first day, when I drove up your driveway, I was looking for a place to hide. Instead, I found a place to stand, to be myself, and that was because of you, Natalie. She reached up to touch his face, still marveling sometimes that this man, with all his options, all his privilege, had chosen her farm, her life, her. Let's go home, she said softly. We can come back tomorrow to take measurements. But instead of heading toward the truck, Daniel reached into his pocket. Before we go, there's something I want to ask you. When he dropped to one knee in the middle of the field, Natalie's breath caught in her throat. I had a whole speech planned, Daniel said, looking up at her, about second chances and fresh starts. But the truth is simple. I love you, Natalie Rhodes. I want to build a life with you right here on this land that means so much to both of us. He opened a small box to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. Will you marry me? Tears filled Natalie's eyes as she looked down at the man who had entered her life as a stranger, become essential to her happiness, broken her heart, and then patiently, steadily rebuilt her trust. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, yes. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to kiss her, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. Their laughter echoed across the fields as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon. Later that evening, back at the farmhouse, they sat together on the porch swing that had witnessed so many moments of their relationship. The stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the sounds of night creatures filled the air around them. I called Maggie, Natalie said, still admiring the ring on her finger. She screamed so loud I think they probably heard her in the next county. Daniel laughed. I should call Richard. He's been asking when I was going to make an honest woman of you, as he puts it. Richard's grown on me, Natalie admitted. For a city slicker in expensive suits, he's not so bad. He says the same about you, Daniel teased. For a stubborn farmer with dirt under her nails, she elbowed him playfully. Watch it, Whitaker, I can still kick you out of my farm. Our farm, he corrected gently, soon to be bigger and better. Natalie rested her head on his shoulder. It's strange to think about how it all started. If your car hadn't broken down in town, if you hadn't heard about Maple Hollow at the diner, I'd have found you somehow, Daniel said with certainty. Some things are just meant to be. You think so? Natalie asked, looking up at him. Even with all the lies and complications? Especially with those, he said. Because we fought for this, Natalie, for us. It wasn't easy or simple or perfect, but it's real. She thought about that, about the messy, complicated journey that had brought them to this moment. How the hardest parts, the betrayal, the secrets, the painful separation, had ultimately forced them both to grow, to decide what truly mattered. I used to think love was about finding someone who would never hurt you, Natalie said thoughtfully. Now I think maybe it's about finding someone worth the risk of being hurt. Daniel's arms tightened around her. I promise to try my best never to hurt you again. And I promise to try to forgive you if you do, she replied with a small smile. Within reason, of course. Of course, he agreed solemnly. Though his eyes twinkled, the swing creaked gently as they rocked, comfortable in their shared silence. The future stretched before them. A wedding to plan, farms to merge, a life to build together. There would be challenges, certainly. James Whitaker was slowly coming around to his son's new direction for the company, but he remained a difficult man. The farming business would always have its ups and downs, at the mercy of weather and markets beyond their control. But sitting there in the growing darkness, Natalie felt a certainty she had never known before. Not that everything would be perfect, but that whatever came, they would face it together. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. The future, Natalie replied. Our future. And? She smiled up at him. I think it looks pretty good from here. Daniel returned her smile, his eyes full of love and promise. Better than good, he said. It looks like home. As they sealed this promise with a kiss, the first stars of evening winked overhead, witnesses to a love that had begun with secrets, but would continue with truth. A love strong enough to weather storms, stubborn enough to overcome obstacles, and deep enough to put down roots in the rich Kentucky soil of Maple Hollow Farm. In the distance, the horses nickered softly in their stalls. The breeze rustled through the fields ready for harvest, and somewhere an owl called out to the night. All the ordinary sounds of farm life, the backdrop to an extraordinary love story that had only just begun its next chapter. Tadyandu.